Hello friends, my name is Ajay and welcome to another practice video for the 2020 FRQ for the 2020 AP Computer Science exam. Today I was actually notified by a lot of comments saying that the College Board has released some sample questions for the AP Computer Science A test. And I had seen these, but these were on my radar, but I didn't take as much of a closer look at them. But because I got a lot of comments, I decided that I would make a video on it. And then there's actually something very, very important that I want to go over in this particular practice, simply because there is a new question type which I've not seen before in any of the released FRQs, and it wasn't on any sort of FRQ in the actual like 2019 AP test, which is the one I took, and previous all the released ones, where now you actually have to write a paragraph to basically explain how you would maybe approach a type of problem using a method that already exists, and you're not allowed to use code inside of your paragraph, so you actually have to type some stuff. So we're going to be looking at that, and that's actually under part C, which is a new part. Usually there's a part A and a part B, but now there's a part C. So we're going to be going over that. Today we're going to be going over question 1, which is for array and array list. And of course, this is the first question that will be on your 2020 AP exam. It will be 25 minutes long, and it will be weighted 65% of your final test score. All right, without further ado, let's get started. All right, so this is the file here, and the file for the 2020 exam sample questions for AP Computer Science A will be in a pinned comment in the comment section below. All right, so it says here under question 1, and this isn't as formatted. It's a little bit more, it's slightly harder to read. It's not as formatted, so we're going to be breaking this down. Under question 1, it says the gizmo class represents gadgets that people purchase. Some gizmo objects are electronic and others are not. A partial definition of the gizmo class is shown below. And so now we have the class, and we see that we have a few methods. So we don't have the constructor. So the constructor is not shown, and we don't have any instance variables, but we do have some methods. The first method is called getMaker, and this is going to return the manufacturer of the gizmo. Then here you have the isElectronic method, which returns true if the gizmo is electronic and false if it's not. Then over here we have an equals and an equals method, which basically returns true if the gizmo, if this gizmo is equivalent to the gizmo object that is put inside of its input over here, and is represented by this parameter. I'm surprised that this is not a gizmo type and it's an object type for the parameter, but we're just going to ignore that for now. It should still work because obviously it says what it does, so we have to trust it, especially if the implementation is not shown and this is a given thing. Like, you know, sometimes in math they say, oh, given this, whatever. Since this is given to us, we cannot really question it. We just have to go based on what they say it does. So we don't have to worry about that. But that is the gizmo class. Okay, now below it says and so this is also a 2-class type of question. It says the online purchase manager class manages a sequence of gizmo objects that an individual has purchased from an online vendor. You will write 2 methods of the online purchase manager class. A partial definition of the online purchase manager class is shown below. Okay, so now we have another class. And first we have you can see here we have a field and we have some methods. We also don't have the constructor for this particular class. So here, this method is called purchases, and it is of type ArrayList, which stores gizmo objects. So this is where the connection to that first class above shows. And then this is an ArrayList of purchase gizmo objects instantiated by the constructor. And of course, the constructor is not shown here. All right, and now we have the count electronics by maker method, which returns an integer, and this will be to be implemented in part A. It says that this returns the number of purchased gizmo objects that are electronic and are manufactured by the maker that is specified as an input parameter. And then we have a second method which is called has adjacent equal pair, which will be implemented in part B. It returns a Boolean. It returns true if any pair of adjacent purchased gizmo objects are equivalent, and false otherwise. All right, and then of course here, the constructor is not shown. So now we can move on to part A, where we'll be writing the count electronics by maker method. So it says, write the count electronics by maker method. The method examines the ArrayList instance variable purchases, remember this is a field here, to determine how many gizmo objects purchased are electronic and are manufactured by maker. So it gives an example here. So let's say we have all of these purchases and we run the isElectronic method, which will return if it's electronic or not for each of them. And you can see that we have like this particular purchase is electronic, this one isn't, this one isn't, like that, and it repeats. And then here, this is the get maker method, which is a method that returns the maker for the actual gizmo. So you could see that ABC comes up 4 different times, and then there's XYZ and LMNOP here. So now we can see what the return value is if we return count electronics by maker, for example, on ABC. And you could see it returns true. The reason it returns true is because, again, it looks for all of the ABC maker, or all the ABC gizmos, and there are 4 of them, but it only returns the one where the isElectronic call is equal to true. So it's kind of a 2-step thing. First, you're looking to make sure that it is of this particular method or this particular maker, and then it looks if it's electronic or not. All right, so then it just says complete the method below. So we can go over to our code, and I can do an open and close curly brace and add a method comment just to specify that this closing brace is the end of my method. It's just more for readability. It's not necessarily, it's not a necessary thing. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is, because we're trying to return a count, right? We're trying to count how many gizmos are actually of this maker and that are electronic. So I need to, if I know that I'm going to be creating a counting type of method, I need to return some sort of counter variable. And in order to return a counter variable, I need to actually create one. So I can say int counter equals 0, just like that. And it starts out at 0, obviously, because 0 is where we start out in counting. Okay, so now the next part is I want to look through all of my purchases. Right, I want to look through every single gizmo, because if I want to check and I want to count how many have the maker and is electronic, we need to look at every single one of them. And so to do this, we need to traverse the array list. So to traverse the array list, I can say for, right, because for loop is the best way to traverse an array list. And I can say int I equals 0. This is creating the counter for my loop. And then I need to create the condition. And so the loop is going to repeat as I is less than the size of purchases. So I'm going to say this dot purchases dot size. Okay, I want to make one comment here, because I've gotten so many comments on this asking me why I use the this dot keyword. So the this dot keyword, again, is not necessarily, it's not necessary. Right? It's not necessary. It is a best practice type of thing. So when you're trying to access the methods inside of a class, access fields inside of a class, if you use the this dot, it is more of a best practice thing. And the reason why sometimes we use it is in case we have a parameter, let's say here, that's named purchases, or we'll create some sort of variable inside of our method called purchases. By using this dot purchases, we're specifying that we want the field and not whatever is locally available. So again, the this dot keyword is not necessary. So if you're writing this and worked on it before you watched the video, then you didn't include the this dot, it's okay. It still works and is perfectly fine for this particular example. Again, if there is an example where the parameter here and a field have the same name, then the this dot keyword becomes necessary. I just use it because it is more of a best practice type of thing, and it also allows you to see what is actually a field and what is a local variable within my method. So that's the main reason I use it. Again, it's also for readability, and it's also a best practice thing. All right, so the last part of my for loop is going to be my increment for my counter, and I'm just going to increment this by 1 by doing I++ here. So I can do an open and close parentheses braces again, and I can add a comment here for. So now what do I want to do? Well, I want to increment my counter by 1, but only when the maker is equivalent to my input and it is electronic. So we can create an if statement. I can say if and I can say purchases, and in fact, I'm going to write here gizmo. So I'm going to say gizmo, right? Because again, to create a variable, I first have to do the type, which is gizmo, and I'll just set this equal to G, or my variable will be G. And I want to set this equal to this dot purchases dot get I, just like that. So now we have the actual gizmo object here, and it's stored in this variable G. So now we can use this G, and every time this loops, it will replace this G with the new or the latest gizmo inside of the purchases list that we're trying to look for. So I can do an if statement, and I can say if G dot get maker, right, which will return the maker for the object, is equal to my input maker up here inside of my parameter, and G dot is electronic is equal to true, just like this, then I can do counter plus plus, right? Because I only want to implement my counter, okay? I only want to implement I want to only increment my counter when the maker is equal to maker and electronic is true. And what I can also do instead of this, if you want to use the method, I can use the equals method right here, the equals method rather than the equals comparison operator, the Boolean operator. So again, what we're doing is we're looping through all the objects. Then for every object, which is stored in the variable G, if the maker of that object is equal to my input parameter and it's electronic, then I increment my counter by 1, right? Because again, I'm counting, my counter is supposed to store all of the gizmos that have the same maker as my parameter and that are electronic. Now, the last thing I need to do in this particular method is I need to, after my for loop, and the reason I'm doing it after my for loop is because I need to look through all of my items before I return the final value, the final count. And then lastly, I can simply say here, return counter. Just like that. So that is the solution that I came up with for the count electronics by maker method. And this one is actually not that bad. All you have to do is just traverse an array list and then have a counter. And the only thing that you have to be sure of is that you have both parts of the if statement in there. All right, so that is it for part A. That is not that bad at all. Now we're going to be going to part B. And again, you can see here how the formatting is a little bit weird, where B part is like after this. And this particular sample question may not have the best formatting, which is why you just kind of have to look at these little like A and B. It's not on a separate page like how a release test would be. So now it says, when purchasing items online, users occasionally purchase two identical items in rapid succession without intending to do so. Example, by clicking a purchase button twice on accident. Especially if you have that, that thing in Amazon where it's like, that instant click to purchase, like that instant buy. If somebody clicks on it twice by accident, they may place 2 orders. So it says here, a vendor may want to check a user's purchase history to detect such occurrences and request confirmation. Like, did you actually mean to purchase 2 things in that quick of succession? So it says, write the has adjacent equal pair method. The method detects whether 2 adjacent gizmo objects in purchases, remember purchases is my array list of gizmo objects. So this method detects whether 2 of the adjacent objects inside of that array list are equivalent using the equals method of the gizmo class. So this is where that third method comes in. If an adjacent equivalent pair is found, the has adjacent equal pair returns true. If no such pair is found, or if purchases has fewer than 2 elements, the method returns false. All right, so we have something here where if it is fewer than 2 elements, you return false, and then otherwise you will look through all of them and complete the method below. So we can now move on to working on the has adjacent equal pair object or method. So I'm going to add my curly brace and add my comment for our method here. All right, so the first thing that I want to do is I want to look at whether or not it actually has fewer than 2 elements, right? And then that returns false. And I want to do that check first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if my this.purchases, remember the this dot keyword's not necessary, but it's a good practice thing. If this.purchases.size is less than 2, then I'm going to return false, right? Because that is what my question says. If it has fewer than 2 elements, it should return false. And this is my if statement. Now I'm going to have an else statement here. And inside of my else statement, what I want to do is I want to look through every single gizmo inside of my list. And what I want to do is I want to look at that one. And then I want to look at the next one as well, the one after it. And if they are equivalent, using the equals method, we return true. Otherwise, we continue to look. So what I want to do is, again, that particular question and looking through each of the purchases will require us to use a for loop. So I'm going to do for. My counter will be in I equals 0 again. But this time, what is my condition going to be? If I'm looking inside of my loop, and this is something that a lot of people accidentally make a mistake on. Let's say I'm looking through, all of my purchases. And I'm looking at a specific purchase, and I want to compare it to the one after that, right? Then my loop, do I want it to stop at that last purchase? Well, what if I get to that last purchase? Then I'm trying to compare it, to the next one. And if the next one does not exist, that's going to give an error. So actually, we want to stop our loop one early. And the reason we want to stop the loop one early is so that it can take that second to last one and then compare it to the last one. And that way, all of the items inside of the array list will actually, they will be searched properly. So to account for this, instead of doing this.purchases.size, I can do this.purchases.size minus 1 for my condition. And then my counter can be I++, or my increment can be I++. So this is a for loop. This is else right here. All right, so now inside of my for loop, I need to do the same thing that I did up here, where I need to create some sort of variable to represent my gizmo object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say gizmo, and I'm going to say first equals this.purchases.getI, right? But then I want to compare it to the next one. So I could say gizmo second equals this.purchases.get I plus 1. Just like that. And having this I plus 1 will basically get the next gizmo in our list. Then all I have to do is I simply say if my first gizmo dot equals the second gizmo, just like that, then I want to return true. Just like that. Now, what if I go through all of my items? And I'm going to have my little comment here. Let's say I go through all of my items and I don't find, or it never returns true. Because again, once it returns, the method stops running, so it's not going to continue. But let's say I get to the end of my for loop and I never return true, meaning that there was never any pairs. Then after my for loop is done executing, I want to return false. And I want to return false because there was no matching pair. All right, everyone. So that is the solution for part B. The first thing I do is, again, I check to make sure that the actual purchases.size is greater than or equal to 2. Basically, if it's less than 2, I want to return false because I can't compare it to anything. Then here I have my for loop, where I basically will start from the first element and go all the way to the second to last element. Then I'm going to take each element and I'm going to compare it to the next element. And if they are equal, it will return true. But if I go through that entire process and there's never a matching pair, I will return false. And that is the solution for part B. Now, this is usually where we would end. Usually there's a part A and a part B, but now there's this new part C, which is definitely something that has not been in any of the previous videos, because it's not been something that existed. It wasn't part of any of the previous FRQ, the release tests. So we have to look at this, and we're going to have to try to solve this by writing a paragraph. So I want to actually scroll to the bottom where it says here, preparing for open-ended questions, because this kind of gives us a little bit of instructions, especially if you don't already know how to do this or never seen this before, right? Most people have never seen this before. They only have an FRQ where they have to answer, questions about a certain methods. It says here that a single paragraph, so 2 to 4 sentences, may be sufficient for answering these questions. The provided bullets in the question are meant to guide your single paragraph response, okay? And you can see here that you have identify and describe and all that stuff. So we're going to go back up to question number 1, part C, and we're going to try to figure out how we can answer this question. So it says a programmer would like to add a method getCheapestGizmo by maker, which returns the least expensive gizmo purchased by an individual for a given maker. Write a description of how you would change the gizmo and online purchase manager class in order to support this modification. All right, so the first thing that we could do when we think about this is, in order for us to compare prices and return the cheapest thing, we actually need to keep track of the price of the gizmo. And up here, there is no method that returns a price. So the first thing that we can say is, in order to compare the prices of gizmo objects, the gizmo class must have a method that returns the price of each gizmo. Just like this. And, if there's some keywords that highlight, just don't worry about that. So in order to compare the prices, not prizes, prices of gizmo objects, the gizmo class must have a method that returns the price of each gizmo. So that's how we would change the gizmo class. And then here, let's see here. So we did this, and we identified the new different things that we would have to do. And then the other thing that we should probably do is we have to write the method header, so we can do this at the bottom, and we could then make it a more concise paragraph. So we have to write public. We could write public, and because it says get cheapest gizmo, you're actually getting a gizmo. So my return type would be gizmo, like this. Public gizmo, get cheapest gizmo by maker, and the maker will be inputted in a string parameter. So that will be my header for my method. So I can say that in order to compare the prices of gizmo objects, the gizmo class must have a method that returns the price of each gizmo. This new method can be called inside of the get cheapest gizmo by maker. Really long name for a method, but inside of the get cheapest gizmo by maker method. And let's see, identify new variables, constant constructors. This new method can be called inside the get cheapest gizmo by maker method. And comparisons and a simple comparison algorithm will then be able to compare all of the gizmo price, all of the prices of the gizmos of the gizmo objects in the purchases field. There's a lot of words there, but again, I'm trying to use, when I say here, this new method can be called inside the get cheapest gizmo by maker method, and a simple comparison algorithm will then be able to compare all of the prices of the gizmo objects in the purchases field. And then the header the header for the new method would look like this. Would look like this. Okay. And then the return type of the public method would be gizmo to return the cheapest gizmo object, and the input parameter would be the string of the maker. All right, so that is pretty much how I would answer part C. This one, again, is a little bit more different because it's more of a paragraph. So I guess my recommendation, if this actually does appear on the test, which I don't know if it will, they didn't necessarily specify that, but being that it's in this practice question and in the next practice question, and there's an entire section here of dedicated to telling you how to do it, I think that it's definitely very possible, so you should definitely be prepared for this, right? And the best way to do this is you need to make sure that you do not use kind of ambiguous terms. So when you're writing these type of things, you don't want to write like, oh, inside of that class, right? Or this method, or you know, that field, or the field. You want to be very specific, right? Like you can see here, I write, you know, like this, or the gizmo class, right? And in the gizmo objects in the purchases fields, right? Instead of comparing all their prices, right? I went into more detail, and that's something that you're probably going to have to do, and make sure that you actually are very specific in what you're talking about, because, you know, especially with computer science and programming, you know, descriptions are very, very important, because if you do throw out ambiguous terms, or terms that are kind of, you know, not necessarily that specific, they could mean really different things depending, like, you know, that same sentence could have many different meanings depending on how you define, you know, those ambiguous terms. All right, everyone, that is going to be part A, part B, and part C for question number 1 of the 2020 sample question exam. I definitely think that this is a great resource for practicing for the exam, which is, I think, at this point of recording this video, it's about 5 days from now. And I'll be going over tomorrow question number 2, which is going to be a methods and control structures type of question. If you liked the video, feel free to like and subscribe for more content. If you have any questions, definitely leave them in the comment section below, and I will answer them. And as always, thanks for watching.